Okay, let's start. Welcome this morning to meet Ishaan Tharoor. Welcome to the Concordia Press Club. And as I mentioned before, we have a little bit of competition with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Kamala Harris around the corner. But I'm sure what we're going to discuss and what we are going to hear from you is probably much more interesting than what we expect from Arnie. Ishaan Tharoor is World Affairs Columnist from the magazine New Yorker since not a long time, since
2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay. And this is a rather important, not to be underestimated position in the American media because of the importance of the New Yorker and because of the way stuff is written in the New Yorker. Every sentence is scripted in a way that it's checked by fact checkers. How big a change is that from the reporter from the Washington Post? You had been for many years, and as a reporter in the Washington Post, you had been an important voice on foreign policy in the US. So to have every quote confirmed by a different person, it's a bit difficult to work.
And thank you, Raymond. It's really wonderful being here, and you give me the opportunity to just even sit in such a lovely institution like this and chat. It's a pleasure. Yes, as you said, I was at the Washington Post for the past 12 years, and for much of that, for more than a decade, I was writing this very regular column. It was initially once a week. It was initially 5 times a week, so once a day. And then it went down to 4 times a week because I was going crazy. And then it went to 3 times a week, which was a bit of breathing room. I was writing sort of a big idea column every day about the world. And in that scheme, I was not particularly heavily edited. You know, I was just churning out my copy. One of my strengths on my desk was that I didn't require much editing, but the kind of, in the last few months when I've been writing for the New Yorker, the experience of the way they handle your prose, they handle your reporting, the way they verify everything you write. You're assigned, when you file your story, you're assigned an editor and a fact checker, and the fact checker is a totally different person who basically spends, depending on how long the story is, a whole day or maybe 2 days fact-checking your story. Wow. And it's in terms of getting something up quickly, it's not what I was used to, but it's, you know, I told you this anecdote of, I did a story where I had a lot in my notebook from Davos, and I had some interviews with various presidents involved in Trump's Board of Peace, the president of Kazakhstan, Armenia, Kosovo, and so on. And so I used those quotes that I had from those interviews in Davos. And the New Yorker came back to me and said, oh, we'd like to have these interviews again just to check with them. And I found that just unbelievably surreal, maybe a little bit excessive. but that's the level of approach, that once the story is finished, it is properly finished and there's nothing you can say about it to question its veracity.
Well, let's leave the world of fact-checking and let's get to the world of reality today. We have this Iran peace deal apparently signed virtually by Trump and by the vice president and by the president, the chief negotiator from Iran. There is discussions about it in Evian as we speak with the representatives of the Emirates and Qatar and others. But do you know, do the American media know more than what is generally known? It's a very general declaration that should lead to the opening of the Hormuz and to the end of hostilities. What do your sources tell you? What do the sources in the American media tell us? Do they know more than what we know about this agreement?
The short answer is I don't know much more. There's There's a lot of speculation from some of my sources who themselves aren't very sure. Basically, as you said, what we will see on Friday when they have some sort of ceremony in Switzerland is is an initial ceasefire framework where hostilities would supposedly cease, including in Lebanon, and the Strait will open. The U.S. blockade of Iranian ships and vessels and ports and vessels would stop, and a kind of new normalcy would return. But in terms of the actual, then afterwards, the idea is that they'll spend the next 2 months negotiating an actual agreement on Iran's nuclear program. And everything we're hearing from the Trump camp is that the terms of those negotiations seem entirely similar to what was already in place under the JCPOA negotiated by the Obama administration. Verification with inspectors, certain curbs on enrichment, all of that was already there. So I think in the long run, Trump is still facing the reality that he's going to come out of this a loser. And that's going to be a pretty bitter pill for him to swallow.
How is this seen in the American press, of very different orientation? Of course, the administration presents this result as a success. There is a lot of relief in Europe, in the rest of the world, probably, I guess, in the US too. But how is it, as far as we stand today now, how is this war and the end of the war seen in the American media?
I think you can read the coverage. I think by and large, there's been a lot of skepticism about it from the beginning. There's been a lot of, I think this is not an Iraq war redux where you had a cheerleading press unquestioningly kind of enable the Bush administration to launch its war with not much pushback and not much particularly strong investigative work challenging some of the assumptions of that invasion. In the case now, I think the press has been critical from the beginning. This is also, if you look at the polling in America, a deeply unpopular war. More than 2/3 of Americans are against it. And there's opposition to it on a kind of bipartisan basis. The one thing you've seen, though, and especially when you're in Washington and you have a lot of journalists who are sourced up on the Hill in Congress, is that this is a war that is definitely supported by a certain rank of establishment Republicans, the Lindsey Grahams of the world and so forth. So official Washington is more invested in this war, obviously, than the rest of America. I think it's the way it's played out. Also, there's a very important, as we discussed, New York Times story, as we discussed yesterday, that illustrated the ways in which this war was also very directly driven by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I think those realities, those dynamics have very much shaped and are very, very present in our reporting and very present in our understanding of what's happening so far. And I think now the focus very much, especially if a genuine ceasefire does emerge in the coming days, our focus now will definitely shift to what does this mean for the US-Israeli relationship? Because the Israelis are furious right now, and this may be the beginning of a new phase in Trump's relationship with Israel, and that's a pretty important story as well. And so, no, I think, I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but this is, this is a kind of strategic blunder. I think that's what we're seeing, and the Trump administration has done a hopeless job trying to make its case as well. And it probably doesn't really care about making its case to us, which is another interesting distinction between now and, say, 25 years, 23 years ago, when the Iraq War happened. At least the Bush administration went through the motions, they lied at the UN, and so forth, but this administration doesn't even care about any of that.
What does that do to MAGA? I mean, MAGA is the main activist base of Trumpism and the most forceful and visible sign of the base of the Republican Party. MAGA was based on the idea that this president is going to get out America out of the world affairs and just be concentrated on American affairs. How was MAGA reacting to this war and to the end now of the war that probably is going to end now?
I think Trump has counted on the short memories of his support uh, consistently through the last decade of his politics. And I think he will come out of this trying with some sort of narrative of victory that a lot of people won't believe in, but enough people will. And I think one of the reasons why he's desperate to get out of this is that he wants to shift the story to something else. And so he knows his supporters will come, a lot of his supporters will come with him no matter what. He has lost some people when it comes to, say, certain influential voices in American media, new media, the Tucker Carlsons of the world, and so forth. But MAGA is with him, especially ahead of the midterms. And I think you're seeing now, interestingly, in what's happening in these negotiations with Iran, there are two, among Trump's lieutenants, there are two camps. There's a Secretary Rubio, Secretary Hegseth, slightly more hawkish camp that is quite uncertain about this diplomatic track. And then you have Vice President Vance and these two envoys in Witkoff and Kushner, who are much more keen and who seem to be now in the driving seat when it comes to the current phase of diplomacy. And that is the tension that you'll see going forward in various arenas, but it's definitely getting exposed here. MAGA as a whole is not in favor of these kind of adventures. I think the genius, I say genius with caution, of what Trump pulled off with Venezuela was that it was swift, it was an exercise in American primacy that everyone seemed to enjoy, and it seemed to be very low stakes for the American public. The US is more insulated from the oil shocks that we're seeing now out of the Strait of Hormuz than Europeans are or anybody in Asia, but there are still effects there. And especially when we learn that the US is burning some $2 to $3 billion a day on this war, even now, that's not something that's particularly palatable to the American public, and probably wouldn't be for any other administration going forward in the years to come.
It's still surprising. I mean, the military operation was a huge one against Iran. You mentioned it, billions of dollars every day. The Pentagon went along with it. The Republican establishment went along with it. It was not really, there were not big demonstrations against the war in the US. So basically, it seems that the American political establishment let Trump do that without a clear objective, without a objectives that could be attained and that can be attained. Why is this? I mean, do we have a world superpower that is deciding big events like this one on a completely irresponsible way?
I mean, it's certainly illustrative of. It's the most clear illustration of a long-running trend, which is this steady and increasing consolidation of executive power in the White House over the head of other checks that are supposed to be there in the American system. Yes, as we all know, the judiciary, the Supreme Court, is very much ideologically skewed in Trump's favor. Congress, which is Republican controlled now, should be the one that theoretically calls back war powers. But I think in the wake of the war on terror of the last generation, Congress has consistently failed at invoking at sort of exerting the pressures it has to on the president when it comes to using war powers. And there have been a lot of legal gray areas in the past where the US president has invoked certain national security prerogatives unleashed by the war on terror to carry out further operations. This war is a war that the US, Trump never really properly explained. He didn't go to many people in Congress to get their support for it. He didn't really go to the American people to get their support for it. And even then, he's still going ahead with it because he has a certain kind of imperial mindset. And yes, the US system has failed in this instance to rein him in. There have been recently some uh, procedural votes in Congress that did restrain, that have sent messages to Trump that, we're not going to give you a blank check for this war. But Congress needs to be, the fact that you have a completely loyalist cult-like political party in the Republicans, that where you don't really have anybody who's willing to stick their neck out in Congress and say, no, we have to vote against this. That's a huge problem for the American system and for American democracy.
Many analyses go in the direction that after nearly 4 months of war, Iran lost a lot of its weapons, lost part of its leadership that was assassinated in the first day of the war, but at the end won, because the Iranian regime is standing, and the Iranian regime has a new weapon, which is the Hormuz, Strait of Hormuz. So if the Iranian regime won, that means the United States lost this war. Is this sinking into the American public?
I think to a certain section, yes, and certainly to a certain section of the punditocracy in Washington to which I belong. I think that's very much the consensus view. The fact that the Iranians, first of all, yes, they consider survival a victory, and they have certainly survived. And they have discovered a deterrent that is a lot easier to maintain and to wield than the sort of the ambiguous threat of potentially rushing for a nuclear weapon under certain conditions that they tried to keep before. As somebody who spent many years now reporting on Iran's nuclear program, I am looking forward to a phase where I don't have to think about enrichment at certain percentages or centrifuges and all that, and much rather think about just the very simple capacity that Iran has with very cheap technology to shut down this crucial artery of the Strait of Hormuz. And they've never done it before because they feared the kind of blowback they'd get. But now that they could do it, and the way they've clawed themselves back on the world stage, I think you could argue that even despite the huge amount of damage they've absorbed from the Israelis and the Americans, the ranks of leadership who've been killed by the Israelis and Americans, including the supreme leader, you could argue that because of the deterrent that they have now shown they have, they've emerged from this even stronger, which is an incredible state of affairs given what was happening in January, the thousands of Iranians who were being slaughtered by the regime, the fact that we really had the sense that this regime was bankrupt politically, morally, and on its last legs. This war, I think, has given it a new lease on life, and that is probably one of the more shameful outcomes.
What are the medium-term consequences of this war going to be on the relations between Israel and the United States? Israel is the most reliable partner, ally for the United States, gets billions and billions of dollars and weapons every year. And this is a war that has not only been supported by Netanyahu, the prime minister. The whole political spectrum in Israel was in favor of that war, and now is against the peace deal, the ceasefire deal that the Americans have negotiated. Not only Netanyahu, all the other main parties, with a few exceptions, consider it's a catastrophe that there is this ceasefire with Iran. What does it do to the American-Israeli relations?
I mean, I would, you said that Israel is the US's most reliable ally. I would say it's, the actual dynamic has been that the US is Israel's most reliable ally. I don't know what the US has been getting from Israel, frankly, in recent years, that necessarily helps American national security interests. And you could argue that that's increasingly the view now that's emerging in the US, especially among younger people. I think the reaction you're seeing in Israel is very striking, because, and you have these kind of de facto or unofficial spokespeople of Netanyahu in the Israeli media saying really offensive things about people like Witkoff and Kushner and J.D. Vance. They're calling J.D. Vance scum, calling Witkoff. This is an Israeli calling Witkoff. This is Yanon Magal. I don't remember his name fully, but he is a prominent Israeli journalist who is seen as a kind of courtier of Netanyahu, and he's referring to J.D. Vance as scum and Kushner and Witkoff as little Jews, which I don't know the translation in Hebrew, but it's quite offensive. Um, it's striking. Look, there have been tantrums that Netanyahu and his allies have thrown before. We've seen phases of Netanyahu being grumpy and then, being mollified in various ways. So I'm not about to declare that this is a moment of rupture. But what is tectonically happening in America is clear. Since Gaza and now accelerating now with this war and under Trump, there is a shift in public perceptions of Israel. Any next Democratic administration, if they have the ability to win elections again, will condition aid to Israel. Maybe certain future Republican administrations would as well. And that was something that half a decade ago would be unthinkable, and that's happening. And now you have a Pew survey that found for the first time, and this is huge, a majority of Americans between 18 to 34, I forget the young Americans, are more sympathetic to Palestinians than Israelis, and that's across the political spectrum. Democrats are very much now becoming the party that's where, if you want to win a primary in a democratic election, you need to have a strong, not necessarily anti-Israeli position, but certainly anti-Netanyahu position. And you need to be strong on reckoning with Gaza in a democratic primary. I think on the Republican side, there's a similar version there, and certainly someone like, there's a wing of the movement, the Tucker Carlsons and so on, that are increasingly convinced, and I would say not inaccurately, that American interests and Israeli interests are not the same. And from their perspective, Israel has been, a player in the region that has dragged the U.S. into rounds of chaos, and certainly there is a view on some spectrum of the American right that this Iran war, which many on the American right don't want, is Israel's fault, and against U.S. interests. And so, what it means for the future of the U.S.-Israeli relationship, I'm not one to. There are many ways in which this can go. What we are seeing are very interesting, slow realignments happening in the Gulf. You're seeing how this conflict has exacerbated tensions between, say, the Saudis and the Emiratis. The Emiratis, we know, have always been quite close to Israel, are getting much closer now. And there have been clearly interesting collaborations there right now. The Israelis see themselves, Netanyahu has very specifically courted this idea that Israel and the UAE and countries in the Mediterranean and India can form this kind of new economic corridor that will redefine the Middle East. Another version of a new Middle Eastern order would be what we're also seeing with Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Qatar and Egypt and Pakistan, the new security understandings and coordination that's happening there. So there's a lot of kind of, the chessboard is moving around quite interestingly. What an American leader does, I think you have a country now and a public in the United States that really wants to be done with the Middle East, that doesn't want to have extended commitments, that doesn't want to be bombing places, and doesn't want American soldiers there. And I think the conversation that's slowly happening also in the US is, what was the point of having all these bases in the Gulf, right? Because when the Iranians started shooting at all these places, the US had to evacuate these bases. These bases were not a deterrent to Iran. They actually were a magnet for Iranian attacks. So the Gulf countries that are hosting the US are saying, maybe we don't need these bases. So I think we're accelerating a conversation in America about really pivoting away from the Middle East once and for all.
To come back to the relations with Israel, this has been a hot question, since the beginning since the Hamas massacre in Israel, and then the Gaza war, and we had a lot of discussion about how far is anti-Semitism behind this pro-Palestinian solidarity and at the universities, and certainly anti-Semitism didn't disappear. Is there in the U.S. Maybe with a tradition that's not as strong and as bad as in our region here. What does this conflict with this difference of interest between Israel and the U.S. and the way Netanyahu played Trump, or the other way around now, what does it do to anti-Semitism in the political life in the U.S.? I mean, if you listen to Tucker Carlson, you often have the impression, okay, well, there is some anti-Semitic background here that cannot be overheard, or am I wrong?
I mean, look, anti-Semitism is there, and it's always been there in the American body politic. In the wake of October 7th, and the passions and the anger that unleashed in various directions, there were definitely episodes of anti-Semitism in various places in American life. I do think also there is a fatigue in at least when it comes to the conversation about Israel. People are getting tired of criticism of Israel being almost constantly linked to being anti-Semitic. And I've listened to a lot of Tucker Carlson. I'm not at all anywhere politically aligned with him. A lot of his commentary on Israel is commentary on Israel. It's not commentary on Jews. I'm not defending him at all, but I think the discourse has shifted in America, and people aren't buying anymore that you can't criticize Israel because you're going to be anti-Semitic. Look, case in point, the election in New York, right? Zohar Mamdani didn't really campaign on Gaza at all. It was his commentary in the past on Israel that people resurrected, thinking that it would disqualify him in a city that has a huge Jewish population. Well, it turned out all the young Jews in New York City voted for Zohar Mamdani, or at least most of them. Maybe their parents did not, but the young ones did. And it's not the same. I mean, and I don't think you could find a single actually anti-Semitic thing he's ever said. He said a lot of critical things of Israel. And I think also the ways in which the Trump administration punished students, basically stripped away First Amendment protections of people who wanted to criticize Israel in a very particular way, to force deportations of foreign students and all that, who, if you look at what they said, it was very critical, maybe like overtly critical of an Israeli government, but it was not anti-Semitic. And so I think people have been appalled by that. The ways in which you had ICE picking up a Turkish student who had written an op-ed about Palestinian rights in a student paper, and you detain her indefinitely for months for that op-ed. And you look at the text of that op-ed, there's nothing anti-Semitic there whatsoever. It's just an opinion about what she saw as a genocide in Gaza. So I think the anti-Semitism narrative has, look, it's always there. There are people who say hideous things. There's the safety of American Jews that's important, and there have been attacks on synagogues, and all of that is hideous and disgusting. But I think the conversation always tends to conflate. I mean, I think there has been a tactic for many years of conflating criticism of Israel with criticism of Jews, and I think that's no longer working on the part of the gatekeepers of the discourse.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your insight and your analysis. I wonder if we have questions, suggestions. Yes.
May I ask a domestic policy question? I'm interested in your take. Do you think that the midterms will be conducted in the regular, usual way without heavy interference by the administration or efforts to kind of influence the results?
Well, we had this session yesterday evening where we had Texas politician Beto O'Rourke talking about this. And no, I mean, I think there's a lot to be worried about in terms of what's building up right now. Obviously, there's the question of gerrymandering and the ways in which the Republican Party in states are going to make it mathematically more difficult through, quite shameful tactics of the line that was invoked yesterday was, in elections the people should choose politicians, but with gerrymandering the politicians choose the people, and we're seeing that in many geographies in America. Then yes, the ways in which Trump has constantly sowed doubt in elections and election processes, delegitimized that. The ways in which he may want to deploy certain federal forces at polling booths, and the chilling effect that may have on people who want to go and vote. The US system is so complicated and it varies state by state that it's hard to say, this is how it's going to happen everywhere. But in many places in America, it's very difficult to vote in the best of times. I mean, to get the paperwork you need to register, to find a polling place, to find a place to register in the first place. None of this is made easy for you in certain places in America. In some states, I live in Washington, D.C., where it's very easy, where you're automatically registered, but no one cares. I don't have a proper vote in Washington because I'm denied proper representation in Congress as someone who lives in Washington. But in other places, you're not automatically registered to vote. You're not allowed to send in a mail-in ballot at a certain point. You don't get that ballot if you want one. So all of this is going to cast a cloud. The current polls show Trump in such a bad place that you could still see a pretty big margin for the Democrats. But the Democrats, for them to be sure of actually taking back the House, for example, they will need to have genuine landslides across the board. And this is a party that has never failed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And so I wouldn't, it's hard to forecast how well they'll do. What you will see is a lot of moderate Republicans, if any are left, in big trouble, because that's where there's a lot of anger in the US. This is going to be a big wave election, and this is also, to get back to Iran, this is definitely why Trump wants to get out of this, because it's definitely a drag on his approval. It's a drag on the economy. We'll see how much longer we'll be living with the inflation that there is, but Americans are feeling it right now in the summertime at the gas station, and that really matters in American politics. But I think Trump is hoping that that'll come under control, and that yes, that they have the levers to pull. If they lose by 3-4%, they still will win, and that's the mechanics. It's very much a similar equation in other illiberal majoritarian states. That the politics of Turkey or Hungary or stuff. We're in that moment now in the U.S.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other? But here you go. The boss is asking.
Yeah, and of course, I'm asking a question about the media. It's a huge question, but maybe just some thoughts. What's the state of the news media in the US?
That is a huge question. It's challenged, but I think we in the media everywhere are challenged by industrial forces, social forces. I was at the Washington Post. I joined the Post in the first wave of hires at the Post after Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post. It was a very happy time to be there. In all my time in the newsroom of the Washington Post, I never once heard of a story where Jeff Bezos had called to say something about a story, ask if this is happening, ask if this is not happening. He never requested a story. He did the proper job of keeping his distance. But at a certain point, the vanity project that he wanted in, say, 2013 is not the vanity project he wants now in 2026. And he grew tired of the place, and the Post failed on its own terms to come up with an effective business strategy. Not because of the journalists there, but I think because of, frankly, Bezos' leadership. He failed the Post in many ways. And then, so you're asking a bigger question. I'll get to the bigger question, but I'm telling you a bit about the Post right now. But I think this moment there when the editorial board had written an editorial endorsing Kamala Harris, and it was pulled a week before the election. That lost the Post by itself 250,000 subscribers. That's a huge number. Then when he pivots the opinion page to a more explicitly right-wing opinion page, that lost the Post another 300,000, 400,000 subscribers. And this has nothing to do with the work of the newsroom. In the US system, of course, the newsroom is its own thing, the opinion page is its own thing, and we don't see each other, we take different elevators to our offices. It's a very separated institution. But the average reader in America doesn't care. Like they see this is, oh, this is now the oligarch's pamphlet. And so the Post is in a very difficult situation because it's losing audience because of Bezos, but then also it's losing audience because everyone is losing audience. You know, I was saying this yesterday that the digital audience of the Washington Post in 2020 was double what it is now. So it's shrunk by half. And that's true across the board. And that's because of the big tech companies and the algorithms and the ways in which, say now, if you want to, even Google search, which was a huge driver of traffic. I don't know how much you guys want to talk about technical things like that, but you know, all the tech companies, you don't get readers now via tech platforms. You have to have your own organic relationship with them. And so the places that are still doing well are the ones that have loyal subscribers. So the New York Times, of course. But you know, my wife, she's the managing editor at The Atlantic. They're doing incredibly well. And they have a great, and they're entirely focused on subscriptions. The New Yorker, again, hugely focused on subscriptions. So to be a media company in America right now, frankly, probably anywhere, you're not chasing advertising. You're not chasing new deals with tech companies. Like in a different era, we were always turning at a dime for whatever Facebook would do with us or whatever, you know, especially Facebook. Facebook has made and wrecked multiple media companies in the last 15 years. That era is over for media companies. If you want to survive, you have to have your own organic relationship with readers on your own platform, subscriptions, newsletters, all that. But no, it's quite sad in general, I think, and I'm curious how you feel here, but I despair. I'm 42, and I don't think people 5 or 6 years younger than me, let alone 15 or 16 years younger than me, are reading at all. And I'm somebody who writes. I don't do videos. I don't do TikToks and all that. And so I think, you know, I think we are now, I'm working at a place that's incentivized just to do good work and good journalism, because our subscribers are by and large quite old, and we're all counting on people in their 50s and 60s to pay money for what we do. But I think it's scary to me that the media ecosystem that is emerging, where most people will be getting their news, doesn't have the same fundamentals, rigor, ethics, training journalistically that traditional media does. And you know, where are they getting their news from in TikTok? They're reading us, so they're reading reporting. And who's going to pay for that reporting? Who's going to support the actual work? And I find that incredibly dispiriting.
But on the other hand, you also have the right-wing turn in big media operations, like
right, that's
CBS, one of the big TV networks, and the possibility that CNN gets under the umbrella of a pro-Trump organization.
No, that's definitely really alarming.
Threatening.
But I think what you're seeing with CBS is not necessarily that, you know, CBS's ratings were already quite low. Now they're tanking, so they're just wrecking a company. They're not really. It was an institution that was of diminishing relevance anyway. And I think you could say this about the Washington Post as well. The traditional media is being hollowed out for sure. I think with CNN, we'll see what happens with the takeover there. It is very much an echo of things that happen in less democratic societies, where a wealthy person connected to the president takes over a media company to change its perspective or change its work. And that definitely has happened at CBS. And We'll see if they do that at CNN. I think what's happening at CBS is so disastrous and so unpopular that they're going to have to move very carefully with CNN. Maybe I'm being naive by saying that, but no, the trend lines are not good. But you know, it's the audience for these TV stations, like the audience for these newspapers, is shrinking anyway. So it's just accelerating depressing trends there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Any other points, questions? Yes, here we go.
Thank you. So the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence is coming up, and actually your colleague Jill Lepore did this project where she would ask Americans how they see themselves and how they see their place as Americans and the trajectory the US is going into at 250 and where they'll see themselves at the tricentennial. So since you're concerned with like America's perception or how America is perceived in the world, what do you think that other countries view the US like by and large at the 250th anniversary, and where is the trajectory going?
Well, I mean, I'd be curious what you think then. I mean, I'd be
You
curious.
talk to more people.
You know, it varies. I think, I mean, it really does depend on who you talk to. My conversations with Europeans is very different than my conversations with Indians or people in Asia, or people from the global South in general.
So how do they differ, the perspectives?
I think with Europeans, there's such an emotional connection to the United States. There's a sense of solidarity, reliance. I think to a certain extent, I think Austria, of course, maybe not the most representative, but when I talk to, say, the French or the Germans, the Brits, there's, you know, a sense of a shared future and destiny together. I think, you know, you talk to a pretty savvy person in India, someone in the New Delhi political elite. They enjoy this moment right now because for them, you know, the emperor has lost its clothes. And you see America for the kind of hegemonic entity that you've always wanted to believe that it is. You've always thought of it as this, and you see American hypocrisy exposed on the world stage. And so it's confirmed a lot of attitudes about American power in the world, Trump has at least, that for some people, they find it quite refreshing. Like at least Trump is honest about what America is or can be on the world stage. There's not the kind of pieties towards the liberal international order and all that. And I think some people in the global South find that quite refreshing. I think the Americans are not aware of this conversation. Americans don't really understand, they don't see themselves as the swaggering power. They see themselves even, and this is across the political spectrum, but I think they are eager to not be indebted to the rest of the world in terms of bailing people out in different places, sending their troops in different theaters. There's a sense of primacy. There's a desire to be, you know, the best, the greatest, whatever, but it's not really linked to actual desired policy outcomes. And yeah, I think also you have a generation of young Americans who have not grown up with the post-Cold War moment, who have not grown up with a sense of America being this incredible place or optimistic place. And I think that's broadly true for a lot of young people across the West. But certainly in the US, there's a greater sense of, the inequities within our society, the structural factors that, you know, the concerns about big tech and so forth, and the people who run those companies. And there's less a sense of, you know, this is what we should be in the world, or this is how we should be imposing ourselves. And like, you know, for all the talk that we have in Washington, say about China, right, and competition with China, the average American is not thinking about China in any way whatsoever. And I find that, you know, I think there's a big gap between the Washington conversation and the American conversation.
Well, thanks a lot. Well, thank you. Thank you, Ishaan. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your interest.
Thank you for the questions. Yeah.
And then we try to proceed with our day. Yeah, thank you.